Hi everyone! I have been making some videos recently about the relationship between self-development and spirituality, and I realised that there was actually a connection between that and another video I made recently about being a seeker. So this idea that in the alternative spiritual community that we are always questing and seeking, we're on a spiritual journey, that we're always kind of looking for the new thing, looking for the next component to add into our spiritual practice and our spiritual toolbox. So I wanted to kind of make another video about self-development and explore a couple more ideas that I've been having around that, and just this connection with this exploration of the self and constant improvement of the self, and how that relates to our spiritual practice. So first of all, I wanted to mention that I think that because a lot of us in the alternative spiritual community have very much like a self-made practice, like for a lot of us, our practices are very eclectic. We draw on loads of different sources. We've been very creative with our practices, and we are seekers. A lot of the time we are constantly incorporating new material all the time. And I think for that reason, like, we are very much focused on ourselves, like our personality and ourself is really kind of to the forefront. It's kind of front and center to the whole enterprise of creating that spirituality, because the whole point of what we're doing is to create something that is formulated specifically for us, that suits us specifically, that caters to our needs and our interests. And it's just inevitable that that concept of self and who we are as individuals would be central to that. So yeah, in that way, the fact that we are seekers, that we are always looking to our own authority, that we are always searching for the new thing and considering what we want to incorporate into our practice and so on, that very much leads to a focus on the self, which therefore organically leads to a desire to develop and improve that self. And it reminds us of maybe the difficulties that we are experiencing in ourselves, and really opens up a channel for wanting to explore that self more deeply and consider what that self really is and where the boundaries of that self are, what that self really looks like. And I think that can result in, well, it can result in some very positive kind of psychological exploration and exploration of the imagination and our psyches and so on. I think it can also kind of result in a little bit too much navel gazing maybe. Sometimes we can get a little bit too obsessed with trying to figure out what our true self is and get in touch with our intuition and all of that kind of thing, which I think there's a fine line sometimes between that being a really positive and empowering thing and then something that can actually kind of tie us up in knots a bit and leave us feeling a little bit lost, like we're kind of just chasing after something that isn't necessarily really there. And that's kind of the nature of the self, that it's often kind of very difficult to pinpoint and pin down. And this has been true philosophically speaking. Like, if you feel like you struggle with this idea of figuring out what the self really is and what your true self, your deep self, and feeling like you're not very good at pinpointing that, you're not alone. Like, all of the greatest thinkers in philosophy and so on, a lot of them have struggled with this too. It's not something that we have figured out, this idea of what the self really is and our self-consciousness and all of that. It's complex, like, it's not straightforward. Yeah, all that being said, I think that kind of accounts for like one reason why we end up focusing on the self so much and trying to improve the self, and that it just kind of becomes this very self-centric, if I say the word self one more time in this video, it becomes this very kind of self-centric thing. But I also think that a lot of the time we come to self-development, personal development and so on, as a means to try and help us deepen our connection to divinity. And because we do need to have that clear channel, that we do need to have this clear understanding of what it is that we're looking for spiritually, and because we don't have that safety net of just being able to turn to others, that we really do actually need to be quite self-aware and actually be in a good state ourselves, kind of in ourselves and mentally and emotionally. We need to actually have quite a lot of space and time in our own lives and to feel quite centered and grounded in order to do that work, because it's actually pretty difficult work. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, but yeah, creating your own spiritual practice, it's no joke. It's not easy. Creating rituals that work for you consistently, coming up with a yearly calendar that you know is satisfying for you to practice and to celebrate. Like all of that, it really requires a lot of dedication and work. And I think sometimes when we find ourselves stumbling in that, and we find ourselves maybe not quite hitting the mark, and not quite managing to achieve what it is we're looking for, not managing to feel what it is we're looking for, like maybe we're not quite managing to achieve the deep spiritual connection that we hoped we would, maybe we are slacking off a bit with some of our practices, and a lot of the time I think then that makes us turn inward and say, well, what's wrong? Like where's the blockage? How can I help myself to be more energetic and to be more just balanced in general in my life, so that I can then turn to the spiritual stuff, so that I'm strengthened and empowered and ready to turn to the spiritual stuff. And I mean, I think it can definitely work both ways as well. Like they can kind of bolster one another, you know? Like we definitely need self-care, I think, in order to be able to keep this show on the road, to be able to keep this spiritual practice thing running. Like if we are very much in the driver's seat of our own spiritual practice, like that really does require a lot of stamina. And we need to be in a good place and take care of ourselves and make sure that we do have like that emotional, mental energy for that. But then I also think that like it becomes a bit of a feedback loop, that then we also turn to our spiritual practice in order to help us feel that way. And I'm not saying that any of this is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just that there are some very clear reasons why it happens, and why we do have this kind of almost cult of the self in this alternative spiritual community. And I think that sometimes, for me anyway, breaking out of that a little bit sometimes it can be a good thing. I definitely can see the benefit, of course, to attaching the two things together, to seeing and acknowledging myself and my own mental and emotional state, attaching that to my spiritual state and how it is that I'm connecting to, you know, the world and to divinity and so on. You know, how I'm connecting with myself and how I'm connecting with everything else. Those are two very intertwined things. And I can definitely see the benefit in just making all that one thing and seeing it all as just one kind of expression of myself and one big way of taking care of my own needs. I suppose I see it as like a multitude of kind of related needs that I have, creative and emotional and spiritual needs that all kind of overlap and relate to each other and reinforce one another. Like when I'm doing well with one, I'll be doing well with the other, and it's kind of, if I can get into a good flow with all of them, then it just all chugs along nicely. And I think that can be a really, really positive thing. And I know myself that when I am being creative, when I am, you know, doing my spiritual practice regularly, when I am journaling and, you know, doing inner work a little bit, thinking about my emotional state, it all feeds into each other. They all kind of interplay. But yeah, I do sometimes wonder about stepping outside of that a little bit every now and then to get out of that kind of feedback loop a little bit. And this is why, even though I will very often kind of connect my self-development and self-care with my spirituality, like a lot of the time those two things will be connected to each other, and that's fine and I'm comfortable with that. But every now and then I just feel this desire to just get away from myself, you know? Like sometimes I just want to drop all of that and drop all of those questions and just not have to think about how I'm doing and what's happening in my head, and not think of myself as being the central part of this whole thing that I'm doing, and instead look outside of myself and instead really, really focus on the transpersonal and really focus on, you know, nature, really focus on what's out there. And sometimes this can also look like focusing on my connections with other people, focusing on my relationships, focusing on my community, focusing on social issues and things like that, and trying to make myself feel more connected to those things. And yeah, but sometimes it's as simple as just scaling my practice back and dropping out all of the things that feel like they are in there just to make me feel better, like just to make me tick along better, like things that feel like, in a way, they're like psychological crutches, that they're tools for making myself a happier person. And sometimes, every now and then, I reach a point in the road where I'm like, I need to remind myself of what it is that's left when I strip all of that away. Like, what's the central point of my spiritual beliefs and practices? And then it just comes down to devotion. And that can look like so many different things, and there can be so many different ways that I focus on that. But yeah, sometimes I need to, for example, I need to have a Sabbath where I don't think about the relevance to my own inner state and my own mental and emotional well-being, and how I'm doing as a creative human, and how, you know, how I'm doing on this at this time of the year and how it relates to me. Instead, I really just need to focus on the actual patterns and changes that are happening out there. I need to think about the symbolism of this time of the year, not in relation to the personal, but in relation to much bigger questions of the cycles of the earth at large, and the cycles of the cosmos, and the cycles of creation. And yeah, I just need to make it a lot more like big picture, and yeah, really just get myself back into that thought frame, like a big picture thought frame of like, what is it that makes me feel awe? And yeah, just get back to that. So I went in a direction I wasn't expecting to in this video. I actually thought I was really just going to talk about the relationship between self-development and spirituality and leave it at that. But funny that I ended up kind of almost advocating again for like dropping all of that out of it. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing that it's there. I don't think that it's a bad thing that the two things are intertwined. I think it's actually quite inevitable, but I'm just making a case, I guess, for sometimes stripping that away and getting back to basics, and just reminding yourself of why it is that you're doing spirituality in the first place, because there are so many kind of positive psychology things that you could be doing that don't include reverence, that don't include divinity, that don't include anything overtly spiritual, you know, and sometimes reminding yourself why you went down that path in the first place can be a positive thing. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. And yeah, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell button to make sure that you're notified when I post videos. And I will be talking to you again soon. Take care.